Hancock, who is the Secretary of State for Health, and she's going to be talking about the NHS and technology implementation.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you, Mark.
You're welcome.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Good morning. Hey, that's better. So, Hadley, can you share with us a little bit of your background, how you ended up in the NHS?
Sure. My background is as a software engineer and a tech director, CTO founder, a CTO and startup founder. And about 12 years ago, I had the honor of working in the NHS, designing and delivering a digital service for junior doctors as they rotate from hospital to hospital. All of the user research was showing that it took them a long time to work out who their colleagues were going to be, where HR was, what training sessions they had to attend, the boring admin stuff, which is important, but not as important as treating patients when you're being bleeped 60 times a day. So we built a web-based digital sort of structured social network thing for them. But the real challenge of it was building something that could run in every hospital and GP surgery in London and the Southeast, which should be so easy because the web and the internet do this natively, right? You build a website and it runs in everyone's browsers on every device. We just couldn't do that in the NHS because of the way the network was structured, because of the fact that the browsers were old, because of the fact that many of the computers were so old, they had trouble switching between applications. So I went back to the junior doctors and said, these are the choices, what would you like me to do? And they said, we're never going to use this on the wards, we're way too busy treating patients, so put it in the browser, build it in a normal way, and we'll just use it on our phones and at home and in residences and things. So fine, we did that, but I finished that project with this massive sense of lost opportunity for the NHS. There's so many amazing things that we could do, the tech world could do for them, with them. So many people in the NHS who were trying to build better solutions, trying to solve problems, trying to develop better ways to interact with patients. And we just couldn't do it because the technology infrastructure wasn't there and the rules hadn't been created to make that work. So with that frustration and that at some point we need to make this better in my mind, I went off to create my startup, which was LinkedGov. I ended up in rolling that into the Open Data Institute and then going into the Government Digital Service. I spent a little while with Mozilla as well. And then from GDS, Matt Hancock became the Minister for Cabinet Office in the election from 2015. And Matt decided that he wanted a tech advisor in his office. So he interviewed a bunch of us. And in my interview, he said to me, "Where are you going with your career?" I hate that question. I have no idea. I don't make plans. I'm working on this problem. I will work on it until I've done as much as I possibly can, and then I'll find another problem to work on. But at some point, I need to get back to the NHS.
So you found the calling. It almost sounds like your poacher turned gatekeeper was working in the NHS. And now, just before we continue, I mean, I don't know about you, are we good with accents? Is that a northern accent or an American accent? Just tell us a little bit about where you're from.
I am originally from the UK. I was born here in London, but...
We should have played a game. How many of you thought she was from the UK when she started speaking? All right.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
You get free NHS care for life.
There you go. But my parents are American, and my brother and I are very close together in age, and so suddenly they had a very big family. And so we moved to the US, where I was brought up with my mother's family and all of my cousins. But I had this romantic notion about how London was the big city, the place to be, and was trying to get back as soon as I could. I came back after the dot-com bubble burst in 2002, and there were no jobs in Silicon Valley. So I went through 2 companies and decided that it was really time to start over somewhere with a bit more stability. So I came here, and I've been back here ever since.
Oh, great. And then you obviously saw that role linking of obviously technology, government. I think one of the questions which always burdens my mind with the NHS is obviously we're all incredibly grateful that we've got a free healthcare system that's constantly being either criticized, keeping on top of things. How are you seeing that, you mentioned with doctors, we're not going into the debate over payments of doctors, when they're struggling to just survive the day with keeping on top of patients, and then to implement a new system, like I'm sure all of us see when you put a new CRM system in your company or a new technology, no one fully uses it, and then it's understanding. So how are you dealing with this massive integration challenge? Because then, Daily Mail might say NHS spends X amount of dollars and it's not being used, because that's a key challenge which you probably face quite often.
It is a lot of money. The NHS spends a huge amount of money on technology. But it's because the job that doctors are doing is so important that they need better systems. They need better UX. They need access to data from all over the place. When I hurt my arm and I'm far away from home, I need that information from that hospital to be able to get to my GP so that my GP knows what they did for me, and I don't have to manage the paper myself. I don't have to remember what it was that they did to my arm. And the user interfaces, the applications that doctors have to use, and the number of times they have to log in, the entire experience is just incredibly frustrating and takes time away from them being good doctors and takes time away from them being able to just spend time with me, helping me fix my arm. So that's what really makes this so important.
But no, I totally understand that. But then haven't we been, because obviously your NHSX now is a new organization, maybe you can share with the audience a little bit, but how does that differ from, I've been hearing, NHS Digital, these things, because there seems to be lots of organizations which, it's clear technology is important, certainly for healthcare, we'll be hearing about that later today. So what's the difference between NHSX and NHS Digital and some of the other things that we read and see?
So NHSX's job is to drive the transformation. So we know that the NHS needs to work more like the internet. We know that that's going to have impacts on procurement because every hospital and every GP surgery sorts out their own kit. We know that that's going to have an impact on the way hospitals are run. Chief execs need to be thinking about how their technology is working for their users, in addition to things like their 4-hour wait times and their cancer survival rates. We know that we need to reshape the market. There really aren't that many suppliers into the NHS because we've made it so difficult that many of the amazing, innovative people here probably have looked at the NHS and decided not to build anything for it, or it never occurred to you because nobody else is working on it. We need to open that up. We need to make it so that the NHS technology ecosystem works in the same way as the rest of the world's does. And for that, we need NHSX to drive the transformation. Now, the delivery is done in lots of different places, and NHS Digital is a big part of that.
So, right, so you're saying NHSX is like the strategy house, the designing, and then obviously where you want to implement it, you will do. Because I think that's a question. I mean, I previously had a startup in the healthcare sector. Selling into the NHS is a complete nightmare. Granted, it was 10 years ago.
There you go.
But because ultimately, that's the first question which I'm sure many people in the audience, if we're not wrong, after the Ministry of Defence, you're probably the largest buyer of technology. And how are you going about making, obviously, procurement for startups to engage, where everything we're dealing with procurement, a startup wants to do a deal, they'll do it in 2 weeks. I think 6 months, a year is things. So are you actively looking at ways for people who are in health tech to sell in, et cetera?
We are definitely doing that. We know that the way things work right now, if you are in health tech and you are willing to jump through all the hoops that we've created through this massively complex system, you have to normally do some kind of a pilot with the first group that you want to sell into and prove that the thing you've got works.
Right.
Which makes sense. We need an evidence base. But you finish that, and then you go through procurement, and then you're settled in that place, and you want to go to the next part of the NHS and sell it to them, and they want to start over and create a new evidence base. That doesn't make any sense. So we are addressing those kinds of rules that are getting in the way from the procurement side. And then from the tech side, most of our data and most of the way the NHS runs is in large, full-stack, locked-in systems, where it's really difficult to change the user interface or to add a new application on the same data that creates a different user journey, the stuff we do on the web all the time. So we need to basically change the architecture of what we're doing to where it opens up the hosting layer, the data layer, the application layer, so then it's just much easier to come in. And
your remit is looking more at, like, obviously what you're saying now is basically CRM, back-end, data sharing. Are you also looking at technologies that were obviously front-facing? Like, if I'm not wrong, you did a partnership with Alexa, looking at ways for, people calling up saying, I've hurt my toenail, So are you looking at how to take the burden off the front end, i.e. the customer side as well? Absolutely. Taking the burden away from the front lines is massive. And there's a huge amount of NHS work that is basically compensating for the fact that the system is complicated. So GPs and receptionists and everyone across the NHS
spends a lot of time not just providing care, but also helping me as the patient understand what other parts of the NHS they need to talk to, which paper needs to go where, all of the bits that really is just us pushing the complexity of the system onto the patient. I keep thinking of online shopping where you buy a thing from a particular website, and it could be coming from any of thousands of companies. It could be coming from hundreds of warehouses all over the world. It could get to you by airplane, by lorry, by motor scooter, by foot delivery. You don't care. You don't need to know. You just know that you've bought the thing, and then it appears. And we need to look at the NHS through that lens of user journeys, both for patients and for staff, to start to make sense of this complexity rather than pushing it onto everyone, which is massively inefficient and horrible for health outcomes.
And that's really interesting. So is your, obviously, cost savings, not going into talking about full financial budgets at the moment, but is it that you're looking to increase efficiency and drive down costs? You're looking to spend money on development? I mean, are you, I know that there was a project you did of trying to cut, was it 75 million from paper and other areas? So is part of your objectives to see how we can drive costs down through technology, or it's invest in making it better?
It's a bit of both. So we're already spending a huge amount of money, and we're not necessarily getting things that are meeting our user needs. So it's not that much about needing a whole lot of more additional money. It's about making sure that the money we're spending is actually delivering stuff that is efficient and effective. The money is an issue, but the bigger issue is the fact that because of that complexity, because of all of the people who are trying to cope with all the different processes across all these organizations, the NHS is stretched. And we know we need to grow as a health service. We know that the country's growing. We know that everybody's living longer, needs more healthcare. This is all basic stuff, right? We have to make the health system run better in order to be able to accommodate that. So it's not just about cutting budgets, it's about being able to deliver more.
Sure. And are you seeing resistance? Obviously, someone who runs one of the hospital groups has their way of doing it. And obviously, are you seeing that across the board? Because obviously, some of us have a more warped opinion from reading what we read in the papers of saying that they do generally want digital transformation, but it's how to do it, or people are kind of stuck in their ways, and your job is to try and push through some of these. What are you seeing there from the, obviously the working levels beneath you?
The full range, everything from hospitals that are doing amazing things and that really just need the rules to get out of their way, all the way through to those that want to do the right thing but don't know what the right thing is. And incidentally, that means we in the center are struggling with the difference between the rules we absolutely need to mandate, like interoperability, and the how can we help you think about what good looks like. We don't want to mandate that because that then gets in the way of everyone meeting their own user needs. That's no good. But then continuing on the spectrum, we do have places that are still operating primarily on paper. And many of them are so busy trying to keep things running and trying to treat their patients that they don't necessarily have a lot of time and headspace for thinking about digital transformation. So a big part of our challenge is figuring out how can we help them create space for that journey. What kind of support do they need?
So exactly like we said, that internal strategy house of we heard, I think, the first panel this morning was talking about digital transformation. So you're basically helping the NHS as a whole deal with that. I think one question for you is, if I was to say to you, because I know we've only got about 5 minutes left, where in the next 2 years, if we were sitting here on stage, and hopefully your wrist will be fixed.
Thank you. So too.
But what would we see? Where would you like to see the organisation? If you would say we'd be sitting back here, what would you have liked to achieve in the next 18 months, 2 years?
I am living for the moment when patients or clinicians or managers working in the NHS say, this is the way it always should have worked. This is obviously the way that makes total sense. I should be able to get information about what happened to me in hospital and in my GP surgery, or they should be able to refer me without a whole bunch of additional paperwork, or they should be able to find out what they need to know about their budgets, or all the different things that are sort of fundamentally logical when you say them out loud. When we get to the point where everyone says, of course, this is the way it should have worked all along, then I feel like we'll have made a huge difference.
So your plan is changing mindsets and trying to implement change. How do you see, just as a general picture, obviously you now with your, what I'd say, public sector hat, not just NHS. You know, the big challenge is selling for anyone into selling to government, working with government. I think every startup, entrepreneur who has a product looking to do that. How are you seeing, because obviously NHSX is one thing, are you seeing that the government is trying to do other initiatives like this? Is it just that it's like an oil tanker and a speedboat, oil tanker being the government / corporates? I have the same question with corporates, by the way, so it's not like I'm picking on you. You know, is this something that you think also through your initiative, other departments, organizations will try and improve?
Definitely, and it's already going on. So I did spend 2 years in government digital service in GDS and Cabinet Office, and we were looking at exactly this question. How do we get public sector organizations, and in that case particularly central government, to work with tech in the same way as everyone else does? So when I need to build something, you know, I want to have a go at a weekend and want to build a prototype, I go to AWS or Azure and I spin up the hosting space I need and the environment that I need, and I build the thing, and if it works, great, I keep it. If it doesn't, I close it down. And I've spent, what, a few pennies? And that makes me really flexible. When we started a digital transformation journey in central government, the only way to do the equivalent was to go through a 9-month OGU procurement for looking for hosting, which was extraordinarily expensive for government and then for everyone who had to bid. And then as a result, it didn't make sense to do it unless it was going to be a much bigger project. So we have a bunch of things going on in central government and in the NHS, and then a bunch of really exciting initiatives in local government too, to navigate that transformation from we are a big organization, we are all about buying things that need to be the same all the time, like we'd like a long-term contract for buying buildings or
paper
and pencils, exactly. Which is so different from the way that we interact with tech services and digital services.
And do you think you'll be seeing that you'll be doing much more connecting with the innovation ecosystem, like you mentioned? Obviously, you are a developer by like hackathons with NHSX, trying to get some talent to try and, you know, open boundaries?
Definitely. Those open boundaries are critical. And hackathons are particularly useful for getting everyone used to new APIs. So we definitely want to offer that as a service, but then it's also useful for us to work out what we haven't done right. So not only providing all the APIs, we need to get to where the entire ecosystem for the NHS is open API based, but then also the documentation and the explanations and the data model and all the stuff that you need to know in order to build on this stuff. We need to make sure that we're providing, and we've got to do that in an iterative way.
So we're running out of time. Do you really think it's foreseeable in the next few years that the NHS can have an open API-based system that you were saying?
Absolutely.
That's quite bold.
It is quite bold, but everybody's frustrated with the status quo. Nobody's happy with it because it's not meeting everyone's needs. It's not meeting anyone's needs, except for those people who go well out of their way to fight the inertia of the system. This just isn't a good way to run a health service. We all could do and be so much better, so we need to unlock that.
And you think that's the feeling across the board, other than some of the old guard thinking, well, we're going to have cyber issues, data, you know, they'll bury you in bureaucracy?
There is definitely a bit of cynicism, and certainly we've seen this before. Although we need to be very clear about the fact that we haven't seen this before. We've seen the National Program for IT, which was a massive spend on, we will build one thing in the center and you will use it. Yeah, that's never going to meet everyone's user needs. And then what we've done since then, which is, no, we'll just stay out of it and you can do whatever you want, which is fine within, you know, a hospital, but then there's no interoperability. We need to have the right amount of rules to make sure that everyone's part of the same NHS, but then also the ability to get out of the way and let them crack on.
That's great. And final message to any startup in the audience, how do you recommend they try and engage with the NHS if they were looking to do some technology projects? What would you give them as your 10 seconds on the clock pitch?
In the very short term, come talk to us. We are here to help and to open the doors, but we're also then trying to adapt the system as we go to make sure that we don't then have to be the introductory point, because long term we don't want to be the bottleneck either.
That's very good. Well, listen, ladies and gentlemen, please thank Hadley for a fascinating insight into the future of the NHS.
Thanks for having me.
Mark, over to you.
Thank you.